What if one promise made in a single night could change two lives forever? A lonely cowboy offered shelter to a stranded woman, but the next morning, her unexpected question changed everything. Stay with us until the end to discover this heartwarming Wild West story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more unforgettable stories. Let's begin. The last rays of the Montana sunset faded behind the rugged mountains, leaving the wide valley bathed in soft shades of orange and purple. Ethan Brooks tightened the final strand of barbed wire along the broken fence that bordered his ranch. It had been a long day filled with hard labor, and every muscle in his body reminded him of the countless hours spent repairing storm damage. His ranch was not the largest in the territory, but it was built with years of honest work and determination. As he wiped the dust from his hands, he mounted his trusted horse and started the slow journey home through the quiet prairie. The evening air carried a cool breeze that rustled the tall grass stretching across the open land. Ethan followed the familiar trail leading toward his cabin, expecting another peaceful night alone. Suddenly, his horse slowed on its own, sensing someone ahead. Near the edge of the road stood a young woman, her dress torn by brush and travel, her boots covered in dust. She looked exhausted, barely able to remain standing. Ethan carefully dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. In the fading light he noticed fear in her eyes, but he also saw determination, as though she had refused to give up despite everything she had endured. The young woman introduced herself as Grace Carter. Her voice trembled as she explained that the stagecoach she had been traveling on had been ambushed earlier that afternoon by a ruthless gang of outlaws. The passengers had scattered in every direction, while the bandits stole supplies and horses. Grace escaped into the hills, hiding until the attackers disappeared, but when she returned, everyone was gone. With no horse, little food, and miles separating her from the nearest town, she had wandered until sunset, hoping someone trustworthy would appear before darkness completely surrounded the valley. Ethan listened quietly without interrupting. Years living on the frontier had taught him that danger often traveled these lonely roads, and he knew too well how helpless a traveler could become. He glanced toward the distant hills, making sure no riders were following her, then looked back at Grace. She seemed frightened but honest. Ethan finally broke the silence with calm confidence. "You can stay at my cabin tonight," he said. "You'll be safe there. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." Relief immediately softened Grace's worried expression, and for the first time since the attack, she believed she might survive this terrible ordeal. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful. Ethan allowed Grace to ride his horse while he walked beside them through the quiet fields. He asked only simple questions, never pushing her to relive painful memories. Grace noticed his quiet manners and the respect with which he treated her, something she had rarely experienced while traveling alone. As they reached the ranch, the warm glow of lantern light shined through the cabin windows. Though modest, the small wooden home looked welcoming against the vast wilderness, offering comfort after a day filled with fear and uncertainty. Inside the cabin, Ethan lit another lantern and placed fresh firewood into the stone fireplace until warm flames filled the room. He prepared a simple supper of beef stew, homemade bread, and hot coffee. Grace had expected suspicion or endless questions, but Ethan simply invited her to sit and eat. Hunger quickly overcame her hesitation. Between quiet bites, she thanked him repeatedly for helping a complete stranger. Ethan only smiled and replied that anyone raised with honor would have done the same. His calm words carried sincerity, making the small cabin feel safer than any place Grace had known in weeks. After supper, Ethan showed Grace the only bedroom in the cabin, neatly preparing fresh blankets and a clean pillow. He insisted she take the room while he slept beside the fireplace with an old wool blanket. Grace protested, saying she could sleep on the floor instead, but Ethan politely refused. "A guest deserves comfort," he said with a gentle smile. Outside, the cold Montana wind howled through the pine trees, rattling the cabin walls. As Grace lay down, she realized this stranger had asked for nothing except that she rest peacefully. Closing her tired eyes, she silently wondered whether honest men like Ethan Brooks still truly existed in the American West. Golden morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, filling the small room with warmth after the cold Montana night. Ethan Brooks quietly finished feeding the horses before tightening the saddle on his favorite gelding. The ranch was peaceful, with birds singing from the nearby pine trees, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of fresh grass across the valley. Everything felt normal again, yet Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the frightened traveler he had rescued the previous evening. He hoped she had finally found a peaceful night's sleep after everything she had endured on the lonely frontier road. A few moments later, the cabin door slowly opened and Grace Carter stepped outside. She carefully folded the wool blanket Ethan had lent her and held it close to her chest. Her face looked brighter than the night before, but there was still uncertainty in her eyes. She watched Ethan for a moment before quietly walking toward him. After gathering enough courage, she softly asked, "Will you still keep your word?" Ethan paused, surprised by the question. He turned to face her, wondering whether she feared someone was still searching for her. Grace lowered her eyes before speaking again. She explained that she had not only lost the stagecoach, but also the last place she could call home. Months earlier, illness had taken both of her parents, leaving her completely alone. She had been traveling west in hopes of finding distant relatives, only to discover they had already moved away years before. Now she had no family, no money, and nowhere safe to begin again. Looking at Ethan, she reminded him that he had promised she would be safe, and she quietly wondered whether that promise ended with the sunrise. Ethan listened without saying a word until Grace finished. He understood loneliness better than most people in the territory. Years earlier, he had buried his own father and spent countless seasons building the ranch by himself. He knew that a person could survive harsh winters and dangerous trails, but facing the future completely alone was a far heavier burden. After a long moment, he smiled warmly and answered, "A promise doesn't end with sunrise. If I gave you my word, then I'll keep it." Those simple words lifted an enormous weight from Grace's heart. Instead of offering charity, Ethan offered Grace something far more valuable, an opportunity to rebuild her life with dignity. He explained that the ranch always needed another pair of helping hands. She could assist with cooking, tending the vegetable garden, caring for the chickens, and keeping records for supplies. In return, she would have a safe place to stay, fair wages, and enough time to decide what future she truly wanted. Grace gratefully accepted, promising that she would work hard every single day and never take Ethan's kindness for granted. The weeks passed quickly as Grace settled into ranch life. Every morning, she rose before sunrise to prepare breakfast before joining Ethan with the day's work. She learned how to care for horses, gather eggs, mend clothing, and even help repair fences around the property. The nearby townspeople soon noticed the positive changes at the Brooks Ranch. Grace greeted everyone with kindness and worked harder than anyone expected. Before long, neighbors spoke of her honesty and determination, while Ethan earned even greater respect for treating every person with fairness and compassion. Months later, the difficult memories of that frightening night had begun to fade. The lonely traveler who had once stood beside a dusty road now smiled with confidence as she looked across the thriving ranch she proudly helped maintain. Ethan never reminded Grace of the favor he had done because he never believed kindness created a debt. Instead, they built a friendship founded on trust, respect, and shared purpose. What began as one night's shelter became a lasting story of hope and second chances in the American West, proving that true character is revealed not by the promises we make, but by the promises we faithfully keep.